Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, The State of Fiber and Materials Sourcing in Textiles. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered afterwards via email. Now on to Jessica Marathi Radpavar, who will be moderating today's webinar. Jessica?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Again, I'm Jessica Marathi Radpavar, and I'll be facilitating the discussion today. My consultancy, Reconsidered, has been supporting TextileExchange's material change work over the past year, and I'm so excited that you all have decided to join us to learn more about it. So, why are we here? As you all well know, the world has been forced to pause these past few months, giving us an opportunity to rethink how we do business. It's the perfect time to assess where we currently stand so we can plan for a more resilient future. One of the ways TextileExchange is supporting this assessment is with the recent launch of its Material Change Insights Report, which provides one of the most data-based and comprehensive analyses of how the industry is progressing in its shift to preferred materials, as well as alignment with global efforts like the SDGs and transition to a circular economy. This report builds on TextileExchange's Material Change Index, a family of indices published earlier in the year that tracks individual company progress. This webinar will provide a snapshot of the latest insights on fiber and material sourcing in the textile sector, drawing on the report. It will also share some practical ways to use these insights to create a resilient material strategy that is fit for their post-COVID-19 future. Following a brief presentation from Liesl Truscott, TextileExchange's Director of European and Material Strategy, we will convene an expert panel featuring Stephanie Maurice, a key member of the report author team, Corey Skult, Associate Director at Corporate Citizenship, who authored the circularity content, Joelle Mertens, Senior Manager of HIG Product Tools at the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, a key TextileExchange partner, and Rachel Lincoln, Director of Sustainability at Prana, which performed strongly in this year's benchmark and is part of this year's Material Change Leaders Circle. And finally, we will take your questions, which you are welcome to drop into the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen at any time. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Liesl Truscott, TextileExchange's Director of European and Material Strategy, to kick off today's session. Liesl?
Thanks, Jessica, and a big welcome from me too. Thanks for tuning in today. As Jessica said, I'm going to spend around 15-20 minutes introducing the Corporate Fibre Materials Benchmark Program and some of our report highlights, and then we can dive into conversation with the rest of the panelists. So I probably don't have to take you through the many sustainability challenges that our sector faces. You've all seen the headlines, and many of you are having to deal with these issues every day. But for years now, the textile industry has been called out for its contribution to the climate crisis, human rights issues, overconsumption and waste, and a general lack of transparency and responsibility. The coronavirus pandemic is simply amplifying many of these issues. So shining a light on the fragility of the industry's overall business model and the knock-on effects such as cash flow issues that prevent brands from paying suppliers, stockpiles of unsold seasonal goods that were expecting a fast through flow, and severe supply chain disruptions that will inevitably impact raw material suppliers, so the farmers, the foresters, and other feedstock producers. And many of these base of the supply chain impacts are really yet to be fully played out. So for sure, COVID-19 has had and is continuing to have a serious negative impact on our sector. It's also demonstrating the deep interconnectivity that exists between people and planetary systems. And it's really showing the turmoil that can result when one element of the system is out of balance, and a situation that is certain to repeat itself many times over if we ignore long-term risks like climate change and other systemic concerns such as biodiversity loss. So in the textile sector, we've long known about this interconnectivity and about our dependency on nature. Of course, raw materials for textiles, as many of you know, are essentially derived from nature. Plants, animal fibers, and even fossil fuel-based products, which are originally extracted from the earth. So while our industry supports livelihoods of the people growing and preparing raw materials, there's also high risk that our industry is actually destroying and depleting livelihoods at the same time, including human health and ecosystem health through pollution, land use change, and climate change. And of course, without these favorable growing conditions, without adequate and reliable rainfall and fertile soils, we're at risk of collapse or simply not being able to recover and regenerate. So COVID is telling us really serious stuff. Somebody said, and I quote, with COVID-19, Mother Nature has sent us to our rooms to think about what we've done. Now, that's not to say our industry hasn't been moving gradually towards greater sustainability. It has. But right now, as we begin to get business and supply systems back on track, there's never been a greater opportunity to rethink and to ramp up our work and materials sourcing and ensuring that we really are fit for the future. So that leads us into talking about benchmarking. As I said in the foreword of our report, companies, organizations, and all of us as individuals, we can be incredibly passionate about making the world a better place. And we are, but we don't always know where to start or if what we're doing is enough. There's a lot of information out there, some of it's conflicting, and quite frankly, a lot to do. So where do we start? As a nonprofit specializing in the sustainability of raw materials, we at TextileExchange recognize that it's impossible to know where we need to go and what we need to do until we know where we are. And that's what benchmarking's for. Benchmarking answers the question, where are we now? It allows us to define what the end of the journey looks like and to create a roadmap for getting there. And crucially, it provides the catalyst and momentum to drive a race to the top. So this, where are we now, is the gap we're trying to fill with the Material Change Insights report. The report summarizes the state of fiber and material sourcing in the textile industry, and it draws on data from over 170 brands and retailers that were participated in our benchmark last year. It builds on our Material Change Index that Jess mentioned earlier and was released this year in partnership with GreenBiz and tracks individual company progress. But before we dive into the report's findings, I first want to introduce TextileExchange for those of you who are unfamiliar with us. We're a global nonprofit. We're working with more than 400 members in over 25 countries to drive industry transformation. Our vision is for the global textile industry that protects and restores the environment and enhances lives. And we do this by providing support to our industry members to accelerate sustainable practices in the textile value chain. And when it comes to transforming our industry, we believe that partnership is the new leadership. And we partnered with like-minded organizations where possible, and you'll hear from a couple of them very soon. Our 2030 strategy, launched in October last year, is focused on climate change. So alongside many others, we think this is the most urgent global challenge of our time. And our goal is for a 30% reduced CO2 emissions from textile fiber materials production by 2030. And the plus in Climate Plus recognizes that climate change cannot be considered in isolation from other hugely systemic issues such as biodiversity loss. The Material Change Index report is part of our corporate fiber materials benchmark program. And this program is designed to help textile companies move towards a preferred fiber materials portfolio. And what that is a set of materials which have been assessed to have improved sustainability outcomes and impacts. And there's a lot more about this definition and the material options in the report. But the benchmark program is really at the heart of our approach to driving industry transformation that I mentioned earlier, and through data and insights, and it will be critical to the achievement of our Climate Plus strategy. So there's 4 main areas of activity. The Material Change Index, which we mentioned before, this industry index and family of indices, which tracks progress towards more sustainable material sourcing. Our Materials Impact Dashboard, which aggregates the volumes of materials used by participants, so both preferred and conventional, and models sustainability outcomes, environmental footprints, and savings, including greenhouse gases, water and energy, using the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's HIG MSI, the Materials Sustainability Index. The third activity is around these sort of analytics and insights that help the industry to understand its progress and where it can do better, which of course this is our flagship production, the Material Change Insights report that we're talking about today. And we also provide industry support services to help companies define a roadmap towards a preferred materials portfolio. For example, all benchmark participants receive a confidential digital company scorecard as part of their participation. And so you can see we address preferred materials from all angles, benchmarking progress, quantifying and tracking outcomes and impacts, generating insights, and supporting individual companies to improve. So let's have a quick look at the reporting framework. The benchmark program is designed around 3 pillars: strategy and integration, that materials portfolio that I mentioned, and we currently cover 7 key materials, and material circularity. So these are the areas that we believe make up a holistic, resilient material sourcing strategy. So it's about what you're sourcing, it's about how you're sourcing, and it's also about the way you integrate your sourcing strategy into your business and embrace circularity principles. And we've incorporated the Sustainable Development Goals as the North Star in alignment with a global vision for a more resilient world. And this provides the aspiration for leaving no one behind, as the United Nations has declared. So if you're doing all of these things, you probably have a sound material sourcing strategy. And if you're not, then something might be out of balance. And that's where our benchmark program comes in to help you discover what that might be and what you can do about it. So we're proud that in 2019, 173 companies were covered by the benchmark program. 77% of those were returning from previous years. A solid 66% of them were our TextileExchange members. And it's not only the big companies who see value in the process. We have nearly 40% of participants that are small to medium-sized companies as well. And the entire universe of participants represent mostly apparel and footwear brands. That was at 53%. Outdoor sports brands were at 25% of the total participant numbers, with 12% being multi-sector retailers and 10% from the home and hospitality subsector. And overall, our participating companies represent an estimated $640 billion US dollars in turnover and an estimated 2.7 million employees. So a substantial scope and representation of the industry. So what did we learn? We're going to play a guessing game now. We're going to get a little bit more interactive with you, Jessica and I. And I guess this is really about the looking at some of the key findings that came through in the report. One of those being the biggest finding around raw material sourcing. So can anyone guess what percentage of overall material use came from preferred sources? And you can put your answer in the Q&A box and we'll monitor it. So that's the percentage of materials used by companies, participating companies, that came from preferred sources.
We're seeing a range come in from 5% to 40%, 22, 25, 20. Yeah, I think we're hovering around the 20% range right now, if I had to eyeball it. Okay,
great. Well, interesting. It was actually a lot higher than that. It was 39% of participants' material. So this included preferred sources of cotton, recycled polyester and recycled nylon, preferred certified forestry man-made cellulosics, including the viscose and lyocell and modal and acetate. Preferred wool, including recycled wool and wool from sustainability programs and standards, and down from certified sources. More about the actual details are obviously in the report. And I think your guess may be probably about a good guess around a global average. I would instinctively say, with the group of participants in this benchmark being maybe amongst the more advanced in the industry at the moment. So that could be interesting to check. It's also worth noting that of this group, 85% of these companies have set a 100% preferred target for one or more of their material categories. And these are SMART targets, so targets that are quantified and time-bound and often publicly announced. So we have one fun fact for you, which the Swedish members of the audience will be delighted to hear. Geographically, Sweden is leading the way, and the country accounted for 40% of the global uptake. And these are some of the infographics that are provided in the report that you can dig into later. So we know that the climate crisis is already impacting businesses, and our research, which seems to be aligned with many others, show that the climate is really catapulting up the list of corporate risks. And as mentioned already, climate change and raw material sourcing are inextricably linked. And sourcing preferred materials is really a powerful way for a company to address its climate impacts, while at the same time protecting natural resources through supporting and incentivizing better production and consumption models, and thus ultimately securing future supply. So in 2018, reporting companies, so the survey was based on the previous year's uptake, and the data that came through showed that the reporting companies collectively converted 1.7 million metric tons of materials to preferred. So that 38% that we mentioned before equated to 1.7 million metric tons and resulted in a savings of an estimated 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gases. There's more in our dashboard in the actual report and online, but just bringing this up to the forefront to show you that this is the saving that we're seeing according to the HIG MSI and the life cycle assessment that's behind that tool. So as you know, and if you consider a number of companies with ambitious targets around sourcing preferred materials, you can see that the potential in the industry to drive further reductions is really enormous. And we hope under our new Climate Plus strategic direction, TextileExchange will be one of the driving forces for this urgent climate action and a place for companies to get support on materials related climate action. So another guessing game. Companies are recognizing the urgent need to reduce dependency on virgin material inputs and eliminate waste by shifting towards a circular value chain. We found that 86% of companies responding to the circularity questions this year already have a circularity strategy in place. And this is quite incredible, and because it's up from just 29% of the same group of companies 2 years before. However, we've also found that the majority are focusing on one or a few of the circularity activities with sometimes quite a limited coverage across the entire business. And we'll talk a little bit more with Corey about that later. But this finding was further amplified by the percentage of recycled materials estimated to come from post-consumer textile waste. So the next part of this guessing game is, can anybody guess what that percentage is? And that's the percentage of materials, recycled materials, coming from post-consumer waste.
We have a broad range coming in here, from less than 1% to 60%. Quite a lot around the 50% range, 12, 10, 32. Okay, this is the guesses are really across the board. What is the actual legal?
Right, that's really interesting. I'm sure Corey will be interested in talking further about that. The answer is actually very, very low according to our findings. We calculated or estimated just 0.06% coming from post-consumer textile materials. So a low percent and plenty of room for opportunity, for improvement. And Corey will tell us more about that later. So moving on, let's have a quick look at what was going on around the Sustainable Development Goals. So our study shows that 66% of companies that took part said they have identified priorities with respect to one or more of the SDGs. The top priority, which is probably not surprising for our industry, was SDG 12, Sustainable Consumption and Production, and that was 93% of those 66% of companies that have identified priority SDGs. But the one that's rising up the priority levels, according to, if we look back over previous years, is SDG 13, Climate Action, at 80% of companies selecting this as a priority SDG. So that's all great. However, 71% have, or to put it round the other way, 29% of companies have set measurable targets in relation to the SDGs. So that means whilst these priorities goals are being set, actually digging in and setting measurable targets is yet to be seen. Okay, so that's some of the high-level stats and findings from our report. I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about the leaderboard before we dive into the conversation. And up on the screen here is a snapshot. You can't read it, but when you go into the report, you'll see a double-page spread of the material change leaderboard. So this leaderboard introduces the companies from the program that achieved a level 4 leading position in one or more of the indices, the family of indices that includes the SDGs, circularity, and then across the materials in the portfolio we showed earlier, as well as ultimately the material change index. And I can home in now on that material change index, which is the overarching holistic look of that framework I put on the screen earlier. So these are the companies that are most advanced in integrating a material strategy into their business operations. They've identified their priority materials and are making good headway in terms of addressing the management practices as well as their progress towards their uptake targets, and have started to introduce circularity into their organization and driving that forward. So these are the 16 companies that have sort of achieved that holistic level, including Prana, who Rachel from Prana will be speaking further about their experiences soon. So finally, what comes next? There's a lot of great reasons, I think, why companies should get involved in the benchmark. Some of them are on the screen now. And we'd like to invite all participating companies back into the 2020 program and more. And for the first time, we'll be welcoming manufacturers into our program. So this is a first for that. And we'll be kicking off the 2020 survey a little bit later on in June. And this is probably a really good time for me to congratulate all 173 companies for taking part last year. As a voluntary exercise, each and every one is stepping up and helping drive the sector forward. So a really big thank you from TextileExchange, because without participants, there would be no benchmark program and there would be no way of tracking sector progress in this area, or most importantly, feeding back those learnings for all of us to benefit from. So on that note, I will end my introduction and turn it back to you, Jessica, for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Liesl. And again, kudos to the entire TextileExchange team for putting out this important body of work, as well as all the companies that demonstrated leadership and transparency by voluntarily stepping up to provide the data that made this possible. Sometimes transparency can be scary, but without that type of leadership, we wouldn't have this snapshot of the industry that we're able to share today. We'll now get into the discussion part of the webinar. And first, I'd like to quickly run through today's panelists again. Joining Liesl will be Rachel Lincoln, Director of Sustainability at Prana, which is part of this year's Material Change Leaders Circle. Stephanie Maurice, a key member of the report author team. Corey Skult, Associate Director at Corporate Citizenship, who authored the circularity content. Joelle Merton, Senior Manager, Hig Product Tools at the SAC, a key TextileExchange partner. And I'll be moderating. We will leave some time at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to add your questions via the Q&A link at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll get through them as we're able. So I'll start with a question for Stephanie. Steph, the report celebrates 16 companies making up the MCI Leaders Circle. Can you share a bit about what sets these companies apart from others responding to the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Liesl mentioned, the companies that are in the Material Change Leaders Circle achieve the highest scores across the full benchmark framework. So this includes questions on strategy, circularity, and all the major materials which they source. These companies comprehensively evaluate the risks and impacts of this sourcing and commit to mitigating these through their supply chains. While some very large industry leaders are part of this group, there are also quite a few SME top performers, which we found really exciting. These companies have made sustainability a really central pillar to their strategy and way of doing business. And we're really delighted to celebrate all of these companies in the 2019 Leaders Circle.
Thank you. And Rachel, first, congratulations on Prana's achieving the highest level 4 leading position and joining the Leaders Circle. I'm sure that the whole company has participated in having this achievement. And so I'd be curious, especially as a director of sustainability, what value you get from participating in the CFMB survey and how you use those results to drive forward your sustainability work internally.
Sure. And thank you for having me. We are so excited to achieve this rank this year. We've been working really hard, I'd say the last 3 years specifically, to get up to this level. So it's a huge achievement, and I get to share it with our team on Friday at the town hall. So I'm really excited about that. You know, we love this program because it really allows us to have a comprehensive overview and almost kind of a cross check on what we're doing on our fiber usage. And so being able to calculate it and have a consistent calculation method to understand what are we using, where are we using it, and track that information year over year. You know, we're a small company. We don't have a lot of systems internally to support that work. So being able to partner with TextileExchange on this has been huge and really created this platform for us for understanding of where we're at. What that's allowed us to do is have insight into what we're using and where we're using it, and then allowed us to then build a strategy around how to convert closer to 100% on all these preferred fibers. And as you can see, I mean, we've grown in our ability to adopt more preferred fibers and even complete more models within the framework. So I think our first couple seasons or first couple years, we might have done half of the fiber consumptions. And now I think we've completed all of them this year. So it's been a really great journey.
That's amazing to hear. And also that you were able to use the framework in order to develop your strategies. That's I think something that the team hopes a lot of companies will get use from, not only you know, using the survey to provide information, but actually using the survey as an education tool in itself.
Completely.
Corey, one for you. So Corporate Citizenship partnered with TextileExchange this year to provide guidance and expertise for the part of the report focused on circularity. Can you share some of the changes you've seen in how companies are approaching circularity over the years? And also perhaps speak to what still needs to be done.
Thank you, Jess. So I would say the biggest change that we are seeing is simply the breadth of ambition. So going from 21 companies to 74 companies reporting a circularity strategy in just a few years is a rapid pace of change. And while some are still just starting out with one or two elements of circularity, more and more are recognizing that a circular system has to include extending life through reuse and addressing end of life with recycling, and are developing more complex systematic approaches. I would say there is still a vast amount of work to be done. The two priority calls to action, I would say, are one in connecting the dots between how we're thinking about recovery at end of life and how we're thinking about sourcing. So we see 42% engaging in post-consumer collection and 53% using recycled fiber. And yet, as Liesl mentioned, 0.06% of our total fiber uptake is coming from those collected items. So we're collecting and recovering and we're sourcing from non-textile sources, but we're not connecting the dots to really create a closed loop system at any sort of scale yet. And to that end, I would say companies really need to be investing heavily in scaling right now. I think we have been stuck in a sort of pilot cycle for many years now, and there's some wonderful experimentation and learning that has happened through that. But I think we need to engage in really honest conversation about what the challenges are to scaling. I find that when we're working with clients directly and engaging in private conversation with brands, we hear a lot of detail about the obstacles and challenges that companies are facing in scaling circularity strategies, and they're real challenges that we need to overcome. And yet when we have public conversation, I think people feel pressure to kind of report their successes and are missing opportunities to come together to address those obstacles in a collaborative manner.
Great, thank you so much, Corey. Turning to Joelle with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, particularly with the world and the industry's interconnectedness laid bare by COVID-19, we're hearing more and more this phrase that partnership is the new leadership. Can you speak a bit about how the SAC and Textile Exchange are working together to support the industry, and how your organization plans to use some of the insights from the report in your work?
Yeah, thank you. I really want to start with one of the lines that a former coworker put in my head, and it's really, again, sustainability is a team sport. There is no we're stronger together, and really there's many different ways that SAC and TE partner together. I think we're really complementary in the initiatives that we have. So I'll list a few, but it goes beyond this as well. So one area where I think the survey, the CFMB survey, and the Higg Index suite of tools kind of have some interconnectedness around the brand assessment and questions that happen there. But even there, where there's maybe some questions that overlap, there's a lot of partnership on trying to align some of the aspects of that. So preferred fibers, where both are asking about preferred fibers within the Higg BRM, where we're really using the definitions from TextileExchange as much as possible to try to create that one consistent definition. Moving back to how, so my focus is the product tools, so that's where I'm going to draw most of my examples from. And I think that's where there's also a lot of collaboration. So we look at how the MSI data, the Material Sustainability Index, as part of the Higg Index, how that ties into creating the impact data for the material impact dashboard that Liesl mentioned earlier. So being able to take what's happening with preferred fibers and being able to quantify that back into actual results. And then I think the other two-way part of that is, again, how do we actually improve the Higg MSI based on insights from reports such as this. So in the past, one of the things that we've really integrated in this last year that's going to be launching with the new MSI in July is some of the fiber conversion methodology. So TextileExchange's fiber conversion methodology. And I think even looking at this report, I think one of the really interesting things that's been mentioned several times is that the post-consumer textile recycling and how we can start to just really iterate assumptions to start to refine those impact results further. I think that's really a key thing, is that regardless of how, the different areas where our organizations work together, what we're really trying to drive is that consistency and common language to reduce the uncertainty as we drive towards change. So if we're using different values for carbon or water as we start to look at impacts, it starts to make a more confusing message. So as much as possible, if we can have one kind of framework that we all build on, it really helps drive that progress and measure progress over time. The last thing I really want to touch on is just how the MSI and the Textile Exchange certifications in this report fit together in terms of reinforcing material strategy, because I think there's a lot of value there in both of those pieces, both in looking at how actions lead to reductions in impact. So if we start to say, okay, there's several different preferred material options within a category, each of those may have different strengths in different areas. So maybe some are better in terms of carbon, but worse in terms of water, or something like that. So being able to use a database like the MSI can really start to understand not only where the preferred options are, but then getting deeper into that and say, okay, if this is my area that I really want to focus on across the material production chain, what are the pieces that I want to lean into? And then that's where other pieces coming back out of that, if I am focusing on, let's say, recycled fiber, I go, okay, if I look at my fiber, I really want to grow my recycled fiber use. That's the first step of identifying that that's going to be lowering your impact, but then tying it back to how are you actually verifying that you're getting the recycled fibers, and what are the other impacts that are coming along with that. So I think there's several kind of handoffs back and forth as we go through the material strategy ideation process of really refining down what does it mean as we go from preferred to impact to action.
Thank you, Joelle. And can I just say, it's so encouraging to hear specific examples about how multi-stakeholder initiatives and industry initiatives are working together in this way. I think, there's a kind of a trend toward MSI fatigue, if you will, and to hear that two of the most respected organizations in the sector are really thinking about how they can align and work together is just incredibly encouraging. So thank you for that work and that partnership. Another one for Liesl. Coming back to Liesl, you were in the process of finalizing the report when COVID-19 kind of came along and started to make itself known. Can you share a bit about how the pandemic has shifted the way you think about this data and its role in helping the textiles industry navigate this post-COVID world?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It did feel like it shook up it did shake up the everyday flow of work for everybody, and unprecedented times affecting every part of the supply chain and our community, and sensed that companies were going into shock, of course, first, and then what were those rapid recovery strategies, and and where can we focus first? The pulse was very much around shock, and of course being mindful and careful of health and well-being of those immediately in our respective orbits. But the interesting thing was, Jessica, as we sort of huddled around this as a team, was that everything that we were talking about and pushing forward and striving for was actually about the resilience that we need to create as an organization. And I think, COVID, it just, as I said earlier, really shone the light on the fragility of our business model, of what happens when something completely disrupts it out of the blue, and that knock-on effect and for everybody in every place. And of course we're very concerned and very focused on the suppliers right back at the beginning of the supply chain. They're the furthest away, they're quote unquote the most invisible in terms of the distance and the geographies for many of the sourcing brands who are figuring out a myriad of issues as well. So how do we look at the considerations that we need to bring front and center if we want to really contribute to a post-COVID resilience, where ultimately, as I was saying earlier, the security of supply and the de-risking of the supply of these materials that form the base of our industry is paramount. And of course, COVID is I certainly won't say a dry run by any stretch of the imagination. It's shocking and it's traumatic. But potentially it's the beginning of more shocks. Is this an opportunity, as we were saying, to sort of pause, to think about what does building back better, to quote a saying that is being circulated as we think about the recovery packages, the incentivization opportunities to really hit this head on, and in terms of this awakening, if you like, this awakening that now is an opportunity to think, okay, we've talked about it for a long time, now there's this pause and an opportunity to do things differently. Now I will just finish that with saying, I know that's optimistic. There are every day, every minute concerns to be dealing with. But just to, I guess, circle back to your question, we found that what we're suggesting in the report and the framework of this benchmark and the focus on more sustainable sourcing and production and consumption is really front and center of a post-COVID recovery.
Thank you, Liesl. That was beautifully said. And, you know, I completely agree with this sentiment that there is no going back to normal. You know, in fact, perhaps normal is, the faults in normal have been what's been amplified during this period, but how can we build back better? And so with that in mind, I just want to pose one question to the group before we get into Q&A. Which is, what practical tips can you offer companies who want to build back better, who want to create a resilient material strategy that is fit for this post-COVID future? Whoever feels inspired to begin, please take the mic.
This is Corey. I would say on the circularity side, one of the findings that became instantly sort of far more relevant and alarming was how many companies were unable to track and report their unsold goods, and both in terms of fabric liabilities, but especially in terms of finished product. And that liability and that challenge has obviously become so amplified recently with both consumer demand and supply chain disruptions. So my hope is that this is an opportunity for companies to really take a hard look at how they're managing demand and inventory, and how they're managing that process in order to both protect supply chain partners from some of these shocks that Liesl mentioned, as well as their own companies, and to address this massive opportunity in waste reduction at the same time.
I'd love to actually build on Corey's point. I know we talk about it a lot in our industry, but supply chain visibility really is crucial to creating that resilient material strategy, and that's both upstream and downstream from the places where products are sold. So for companies publishing climate reduction targets, for example, an understanding of your supply chain geographically is fundamental to the ability to start looking at those reductions. And for other companies, it's simply not good enough to blindly source some preferred materials without conducting additional due diligence. For example, the bottles for your recycled polyester could have been collected using child labor. Sourcing preferred materials is not a binary swap from bad to good, but rather it's really crucial that companies fully grasp what they're sourcing. I completely understand and appreciate that textile supply chains are incredibly complex and historically have been very opaque. But we do see some companies kind of collectively really making that commitment to increasing their visibility, which will give them the ability to build supply chain networks in the future with respect for people, for animals, and the environment.
Maybe I'll just build on Steph's comment before Rachel and Joelle get a chance just to, yeah, I think Steph's absolutely right about sort of staying on the journey. It's not always easy, and it's actually quite complicated in parts, but I think it's one of those opportunities that when you've sort of stepped forward and you, I guess, accumulate a bit of knowledge, a bit of experience, you've made some friends within your network, and you don't feel so alone, and being able to make choices about how you stick with partners that are in this for the long haul. I guess that would be my, I hope it's a practical tip. It would be to sort of stay with partners that are trying to work to come out the other end of COVID, and to look at those collaboration and partnership opportunities and innovation that can be gained through that kind of the synergistic opportunities that dialogue and human relationships inspire, and really double down on the good work
Yeah, I don't have much to add here. So I think it's really just that transparency and partnership are the two big things there. And then also, I think understanding, part of partnership is also understanding what your partner needs and how you can support each other to be successful. And I think that's the piece where it's getting transparency not only into supply chain, but what's the performance of that relative supply chain in terms of what they're doing well and where maybe they need some further support. And that's, I think, really a two-way street too. I think even from manufacturers to the brands that they work with, how you're selecting the brand partners that you're working with, and then where you can provide that dialogue too. That I think we're starting to see a change to more, hopefully more of that equal partnership of like not just brands saying, oh, I'm going to choose you as a manufacturer, but also the manufacturers kind of saying, well, you know what, maybe you're not the right fit for our business. And I think the response to COVID, certainly we are seeing different responses by different types of organizations, and that plays into, again, that long-term, who do you want as your partners?
I can just jump in on that. Joel, I think you made a really good point there of like, it's no longer about suppliers just taking work from everybody. It's truly about partnership. And in order to move forward in preferred fibers or anything in sustainability, there has to be partnership on everybody's part. It can't just be good for one side, because that's not going to be an equal relationship, and there's not going to be enough investment from both parties to make it happen. So identifying who your strong partners are and working with them, communicating with them. I mean, we're all people, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about fibers, but it's people that make the materials, it's suppliers, it's supporting people and jobs. And how can we better connect together to move forward in sustainability together? And we're talking about fibers today, but it's all encompassing.
Really well said, Rachel. It's about people. We will go into a bit of Q&A now. I am noticing a few quite specific questions, so those will log and try to get back to you individually. But I'll try to pull out the ones that might have broad applicability. One is from Marianne asking, as a nonprofit working on sustainable materials management, how can we be most effective in working with others to get more post-consumer textiles to be used? So speaking to that somewhat shocking 0.06% figure that we shared earlier. Can anyone speak to that?
Sure. Yes, this is one of the biggest challenges, and I appreciate the question coming from a nonprofit working in this area. It's actually the area that I pivoted from before moving into the industry here, and I think part of the issue is that we often are working from the sort of waste management side, where we're working on recovery and collection, and we've made some great progress there. There's of course more that we can do, but what we really need in order to scale the sort of pull side of that collection is for brands to be actively sourcing to increase the demand, and that's a challenge for brands when there's a real price premium on the technology to sort and recycle those materials effectively. So I think that some of the things that can support more effective scaling in that area are purchasing partnerships that they're structured carefully to allow for brands to retain some differentiation when they invest in a new technology or a new supply stream of post-consumer textiles, but at the same time aggregate demand enough that innovators can scale. The supply is there, it's not connecting to the demand in the way that we need. So we can help on the nonprofit side, I think also educating our consumers and the people in our communities to understand that when you kind of drop a used clothes in a collection box or donate it, in the best case scenario, it gets a second life through resale, but that the vast majority of it is ultimately being downcycled or going to landfill, and that we need to be demanding post-consumer textile materials when we go out and purchase materials, not just when we'd like someone else to take care of our waste.
Thank you, Corey. We have another one from Antonia. There are so many different certifications for responsible businesses. Do you have any recommendations for emerging responsible fashion brands on how to evaluate which are the best and most sustainable?
I can jump in on this if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it, Rachel.
I think one of the things I always encourage other brands, and especially up and coming brands that are looking to either start in sustainability or start their business with sustainability at the core, is to really identify what is important to their brand. Because you're right, there are so many different ways you can do sustainability, and none of them are wrong. None of them are wrong. They're all great, right? But you can't do all of them really, really well. So identify what is the core to your brand. Is it people? Is it materials? Is it environment? Like, which one is the priority? Not saying you aren't going to touch on all of them at some point, but what is the priority for your brand? And then hone in on those areas of the certifications or the partnerships that will help support that for your brand, because that's what's going to come across as the most authentic. And that's what's going to actually motivate your team to actually want to do the work that it's going to take to get there.
That's great. I mean, you couldn't get better advice than from a leading brand itself. So thanks, Rachel. I get just to build on that a little bit. At Textile Exchange, and as actually part of the benchmark program, we take we take that approach. We look at what we call a portfolio of options. Each of them, whether it's a standard or a certification or a code or an initiative, they will offer different opportunities, different strengths and weaknesses. So it's really not a linear, I guess, experience of moving from, good, better, best, although there is definitely some standards that have higher criteria and a higher level to jump over, and then others that are easier entry standards. And we need all of them, but ideally we need to be moving towards standards and particularly those with impacts that are measurable, and we can count on them to take us to a situation where we're reducing our negative impacts on people and the environment and increasing our positive. And that's one of the pieces of work that we do with Joelle and the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, is looking at how you combine some of those sustainability criteria that sit within the standards and other sustainability programs, and how that's translating into impact, and how we can sort of move the needle through that portfolio of choices, heading into a direction of a better impact.
Yeah, maybe one quick add, I think also recognizing that sometimes it is a combination of different certifications for different impacts. So, it's possible, just as one example, you can have organic cotton and fair trade cotton and organic plus fair trade cotton as examples to target different aspects of what's important in terms of what you're really trying to focus on. And I think that's where being able to be specific, as Rachel said, know what you want to focus on first, start there, but then also recognizing what are the pieces that you're not yet covering, and kind of building that long-term view into, okay, what's the potential next step in each of these areas that, are still important, but important in different levels to you.
Thank you all. There's so many great questions that were shared that we're not able to get to, but the team will do its best to respond individually. We have the list of questions with us, and right, if you asked a question and you didn't get an answer, hopefully you'll get one in your inbox in the coming days. Thank you so much again to everybody for joining us. I do want to mention that this is the first of 3 webinars that Textile Exchange is hosting around this report. And the next is a deep dive on circularity with corporate citizenship, which will be held on June 11th. And we'll explore the ideas for achieving the transformative shift from a linear to circular textile system. So if you wanted to get deeper on circularity, that's the one for you. We will also be hosting a participant exclusive interactive workshop on planning your post-COVID material strategy. This is just for companies that participated in the benchmark. It's a benefit of participating in the benchmark. And space is limited to the first 40 registrants. And we will be sending a wrap-up email with the links to register for those webinars, as well as links to express your interest in participating in the 2020 benchmark. And with that, I will hand it over to Rose for kind of a final wrap-up.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for facilitating the discussion today, and to our panelists for speaking today. And thank you to you for participating in today's webinar. Again, as a friendly reminder, all unanswered questions will be answered via email, and an email will be sent out to all registered participants with links to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.